Hi guys, good morning and happy Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. It's our last Monday before spring break, and we're going to be on page, 89 today, kind of in the middle. And so, if you remember where we left off, Montag had just kind of had this meeting with that professor he met at the park, Mr. Faber. The big kind of takeaway from that is he gets this little earpiece towards the end that allows the two of them to sort of communicate with each other. I feel like there was an episode of something where like a character was like on a date and they had something in their ear and someone was telling them what to say. I don't know what show I'm thinking of though. I feel like that was the plot of something. If you can remember that, you should leave a comment. That's kind of what's going to go on through the next few pages here. Is that Bobber's gonna be kind of listening in on Montag's conversations and such. So he's gonna go be heading back to his house, and once he gets there, he's gonna find that Mildred's gonna have some guests, and things are gonna get kind of crazy from there. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. He was eating a light supper at 9 in the evening when the front door cried out in the hall, and Mildred ran from the parlor like a native, fleeing an eruption of Vesuvius. Sorry, I don't know if I said that right at all. Mrs. Phillips and Mrs. Bowles came through the front door and vanished into the volcano's mouth with martinis in their hands. Montag stopped eating. They were like a monstrous crystal chandelier tinkling in 1,000 chimes. He saw their Cheshire cat smiles burning through the walls of the house, and now they were screaming at each other above the din. Montag found himself at the parlor door with his food still in his mouth. Doesn't everyone look nice? Nice. You look fine, Millie. Fine. Everyone looks swell. Swell. Montag stood watching them. Patience, whispered Faber. I shouldn't be here, whispered Montag, almost to himself. I should be on my way back to you with the money. Tomorrow's time enough. Careful. Isn't this show wonderful? Cried Mildred. Wonderful. And that's what's kind of funny about their conversations. You notice they kind of just sort of repeat each other throughout the entire thing. At least they do that pretty frequently. On one wall, a woman smiled and drank orange juice simultaneously. How does she do both at once? Thought Montag insanely. And the other wall is an X-ray of the same woman revealed the contradicting journey of the refreshing beverage on its way to her delighted stomach. Abruptly, the room took off on a rocket flight into the clouds. It plunged into a lime green sea where blue fish ate red fish and yellow fish. A minute later, three white cartoon clowns chopped off each other's limbs to the accompaniment of immense incoming tides of laughter. 2 minutes more and the room whipped out of a town to the jet cars wildly circling an arena, bashing and backing up and bashing each other again. Montag saw a number of bodies fly in the air. Millie, did you see that? I saw it. Montag reached inside the parlor wall and pulled the main switch. The images drained away, as if the water had been let from a gigantic crystal bowl of hysterical fish. The three women turned slowly and looked with unconcealed irritation and dislike at Montag. When do you suppose the war will start? He said. I notice your husbands aren't here tonight. Oh, they come and go, said Mrs. Phillips. In and out again at Finnegan. The army called Pete yesterday. He'll be back next week. The army said so. Quick war. 48 hours, they said, and everyone home. That's what the army said. Quick war. Pete was called yesterday, and they said he'd be back next week. Quick. The three women fidgeted and looked nervously at the empty mud-colored walls. I'm not worried, said Mrs. Phillips. I'll let Pete do all the worrying. She giggled. I'll let old Pete do all the worrying. Not me. I'm not worried. It's always someone else's husband dies, they say. I've heard that too. I've never known any dead man killed in a war. Killed jumping off buildings, yes, like Gloria's husband last week. But from wars? No. Not from wars, said Mrs. Phillips. Anyway, Pete and I always said, no tears, nothing like that. It's our third marriage each and we're independent. Be independent, we always said. He said, if I get killed off, you just go right ahead and don't cry, but get married again and don't think of me. That reminds me, said Mildred. Did you see that Clara Doe 5-minute romance last night in your wall? Well, it was all about this woman who... Montag said nothing but stood looking at the women's faces as he had once looked at the face of saints in a strange church he had entered when he was a child. The faces of those enameled creatures meant nothing to him, though he talked to them and stood in that church for a long time, trying to be of that religion, trying to know what that religion was, trying to get enough of the raw incense and special dust of the place into his lungs, and thus into his blood, to feel touched and concerned by the meaning of the colorful men and women, with the porcelain eyes and the blood ruby lips. But there was nothing. Nothing. It was a stroll through another store, and his currency strange and unusable there, and his passion cold, even when he touched the wood and plaster and clay. He was now in his own parlor with these women twisting in their chairs under his gaze, lighting cigarettes, blowing smoke, touching their sun-fired hair, and examining their blazing fingernails, as if they had caught fire from his look. Their faces grew haunted with silence. They leaned forward at the sound of Montag swallowing his final bite of food. They listened to his feverish breathing. The three empty walls of the rooms were like the pale brows of sleeping giants now, empty of dreams. Montag felt that if you touched these three staring brows, you would feel a fine salt sweat on your fingertips. The perspiration gathered with the silence and the sub-audible trembling around and about, and the women who were burning with tension. Any moment they might hiss a long sputtering hiss and explode. Montag moved his lips. "Let's talk." The woman jerked and stared. "How's your children, Mrs. Phillips?" he asked. "You know I haven't any. No one in his right mind, the good Lord knows, would have children," said Mrs. Phillips, not quite sure why she was angry with this man. But you know why? Because he's depriving them of their television. They don't know what to do when that stuff's turned off. He's trying to have just like a normal, real conversation, and they can't stand it. "I wouldn't say that," said Mrs. Bowles. "I've had 2 children by cesarean section. No use going through all that agony for a baby. The world must reproduce, you know. The race must go on. Besides, they sometimes look just like you, and that's nice. 2 cesareans turn the trick, yes, sir. Oh, my doctor said cesareans aren't necessary. You got the hips for it. Everything's normal. But I insisted. Cesareans or not, children are ruinous. You're out of your mind," said Mrs. Phillips. "I plunk the children in school 9 days out of 10. Put up with them when they come home 3 days a month. It's not bad at all. You heave them into the parlor and turn the switch. It's like washing clothes. Stuff laundry in and slam the lid." Mrs. Bowles tittered. "They'd just as soon kick as kiss me. They'd just as soon kick as kiss me. Thank God I can kick back." The women showed their tongues, laughing. Mildred sat a moment, and then, seeing that Montag was still in the doorway, clapped her hands. "Let's talk politics, to please Guy." "Sounds fine," said Mrs. Bowles. "I voted last election, same as everyone, and I laid it on the line for President Noble. I think he's one of the nicest looking men ever become president." And you just see how superficial they are. Like, you can probably tell that she only voted for this guy because he looks good. Or at least that was the biggest part of it. "Oh, but the man they ran against him. He wasn't much, was he? Kind of small and homely, and he didn't shave too close or comb his hair very well. What possessed the outs to run him? You just don't go running a little short man like that against a tall man. Besides," he mumbled, "half the time I couldn't hear a word he said, and the words I did hear, didn't understand. Fat, too, and didn't dress to hide it. No wonder the landslide was for Winston Noble. Even their names helped. Compare Winston Noble to Hubert Hoag for 10 seconds, and you can almost figure the results. Kind of seems like the political system was rigged to encourage people to vote one way. Like they wanted Winston Noble to win, so they gave him an opponent that would have no chance." "Damn it!" cried Montag. "What do you know about Hoag and Noble?" "Why, they were right in that parlor wall not 6 months ago. One was picking his nose. It drove me wild." "Well, Mr. Montag," said Mrs. Phillips, "do you want us to vote for a man like that?" Mildred beamed. "You just run away from the door, Guy, and don't make us nervous." But Montag was gone, and back in a moment with a book in his hand. "Guy! Damn it all, damn it all, damn it!" "What have you got there? Isn't that a book? I thought all special training these days was done by film." Mrs. Phillips blinked. "You reading up on fireman theory?" "Theory hell," said Montag. "It's poetry." "Montag!" A whisper. "Leave me alone." Montag felt himself turning in a great circling roar and buzz and hum. "Montag, don't! Hold on, don't!" Did you hear them? Did you hear these monsters talking about monsters? Oh God, the way they jabber about people and their children themselves, and the way they talk about their husbands, and the way they talk about war. Damn it, I stand here and I can't believe it. I didn't say a single word about any war, I'll have you know, said Mrs. Phillips. As for poetry, I hate it, said Mrs. Bowles. Have you ever heard any? Montag. Father's voice scraped away at him. You'll ruin everything. Shut up, you fool. All three women were on their feet. Sit down. They sat. I'm going home, quavered Mrs. Bowles. Montag, please, in the name of God, what are you up to? Pleaded Faber. Why don't you just read us one of those poems from your little book? Mrs. Phillips nodded. I think that'd be very interesting. That's not right, wailed Mrs. Bowles. We can't do that. Well, look at Mr. Montag. He wants to. I know he does. If we listen nice, Mr. Montag will be happy, and then maybe we can go on and do something else. She glanced nervously at the long emptiness of the walls enclosing them. Montag, go through with this and I'll cut off. I'll leave. The beetle jabbed his ear. What good is this? What'll you prove? Scare hell out of them. That's what. Scare the living daylights out. Mildred looked at the empty chair. Now, Guy, just who are you talking to? A silver needle pierced his brain. Montag, listen, only one way out. Play it as a joke, cover up, pretend you aren't mad at all, then walk to your wall incinerator and throw the book in. Mildred had already anticipated this in a quavery voice. Ladies, once in a year, every fireman's allowed to bring one book home from the old days to show his family how silly it all was, how nervous that sort of thing can make you, how crazy. Guy's surprised tonight is to read you one sample to show how mixed up things were, so none of us will ever have to bother our little old heads about that junk again. Isn't that right, darling? He crushed the book in his fists. Say yes. His mouth moved like Faber's. Yes. Mildred snatched the book with a laugh. Here, read this one. No, take it back. Here's that really funny one you read out loud today. Ladies, you won't understand a word. It goes umpty umpty ump. Go ahead, Guy, that page, dear. He looked at the opened page. A fly stirred its wings softly in his ear. Read. What's the title, dear? Dover Beach. His mouth was numb. Now read in a nice clear voice and go slow. The room was blazing hot. He was all fire. He was all coldness. They sat in the middle of an empty desert with 3 chairs, and him standing swaying, and him waiting for Mrs. Phillips to start straightening her dress, and Mrs. Bowles to take her fingers away from her hair. Then he began to read in a low, stumbling voice that grew firmer as he progressed from line to line. His voice went out across the desert into the whiteness, and around the 3 sitting women, there in the great hot emptiness. The Sea of Faith. Was once too at the full and round earth's shore, lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled, but now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear, and naked shingles of the world. The chairs creaked under the 3 women. Montag finished it out. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain, and we are here, as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggling and flights, where ignorant armies clash by night. Mrs. Phillips was crying. The others in the middle of the desert watched her crying grow very loud as her face squeezed itself out of shape. They sat not touching her, bewildered with her display. She sobbed uncontrollably. Montag himself was stunned and shaken. Shh, shh, said Mildred. You're all right, Clara, now. Clara, snap out of it. Clara, what's wrong? I, sobbed Mrs. Phillips. I don't know. I just don't know. Oh. Mrs. Bowles stood up and glared at Montag. You see, I knew it. That's what I wanted to prove. I knew it would happen. I've always said poetry and tears, poetry and suicide, and crying and awful feelings, poetry and sickness, all that mush. Now I've had it proved to me. You're nasty, Montag. You're nasty. Faber said, No. Montag felt himself turn and walk to the wall slot and drop the book in through the brass notch to the waiting flames. Silly words, silly, awful, hurting words, said Mrs. Bowles. Why do people want to hurt people? Not enough hurt in the world, you've got to tease people with stuff like that. Clara now, Clara, begged Mildred, pulling her arm. Come on, let's be cheery. You turn the family on now. Go ahead, let's laugh and be happy now. Stop crying, we'll have a party. No, said Mrs. Bowles. I'm trotting right straight home. You want to visit my house and my family, well and good. But I won't come in this fireman's crazy house again in my lifetime. Go home. Montag fixed his eyes upon her quietly. Go home and think of your first husband divorced, and your second husband killed in a jet, and your third husband blowing his brains out. Go home and think of the dozen abortions you've had. Go home and think of that and your damn cesarean sections too, and your children who hate your guts. Go home and think how it all happened, and what did you ever do to stop it? Go home, he yelled, before I knock you down and kick you out the door. Doors slammed and the house was empty. Montag stood alone in the winter weather with the parlor walls the color of dirty snow. In the bathroom water ran. He heard Mildred shake the sleeping tablets into her hand. Fool, Montag, fool, oh God, you silly fool. Shut up! He pulled the green bullet from his ear and jammed it into his pocket. It sizzled faintly. Fool. He searched the house and found the books where Mildred had stacked them behind the refrigerator. Some were missing, and he knew that she had started on her own slow process of dispersing the dynamite in her house, stick by stick. But he was not angry now, only exhausted and bewildered with himself. He carried the books into the bookyard and hid them in the bushes near the alley fence. For tonight only, he thought, in case she decides to do any more burning. He went back through the house. Mildred. He called at the door of the darkened bedroom. There was no sound. Outside, crossing the lawn on his way to work, he tried not to see how completely dark and deserted Clarice McKellen's house was. And that little outburst of Montag's is going to have some serious consequences later on in the book. You kind of sort of see him becoming unhinged, I think, a little bit. Almost like his sanity is slipping a little bit, probably because he feels like he is the only sane person in this world, considering everybody and their various media addictions. So yeah, just have find 2 quotes today that you found interesting, and the question for today was kind of why do you think he has that outburst? What causes him to snap? You're going to write about that a little bit, and then you'll call it a day. I hope that the other classes go well. See you guys tomorrow.